Hi, everyone. We have a couple of minutes, so just greetings to those of you who are early birds like me. I always attend to everything a few minutes ahead of time, particularly when I'm the one that is broadcasting. If you are an early bird and you don't mind putting into the chat that the audio is good and that you can see my screen, that would be great. We have some team members on, and if there's a problem with either the audio or the visual, they will attend to it immediately if you put that into the chat bar. We'll just wait about another minute to give people a chance to log in. Okay, well, we'll get started now. I see lots of people logging in, so I'll take a little bit of time with my intro. You'll note that I don't have this in slide presentation mode because I'm finding that GoToWebinar sometimes doesn't like that and locks up. So hopefully the visual is pleasing enough in its current state. Welcome to everyone. We have such an incredible wealth of talent on. It's just over the top. And I'm hoping that you will liberally use the chat bar to share with each other and to put your questions in the question area. And I'll show you a little visual of that in a second, because it's our collective wisdom that's really going to make a difference when it comes to this subject matter. We're going to be talking about how your culture can cost you, and we're also obviously going to try to give you some methodology for transformation for success. So stay tuned for that. The general agenda for today, we're going to just do a little bit of logistics and leveling the playing field. We'll give those of you who have not had a chance to interact with us in the past a little intro to who we are, what we do. And then we'll go right into what the actual warning signs are that your culture is suffering to some extent, and the cost of a culture ailing. We'll move straight on to how to transform organizational culture, and in particular, culture transformation at scale. Because when you're a very small company, it's not as difficult, but when you are operating with hundreds of thousands of people domestically and globally, it is just a bear. So from a logistical point of view, I know most of you are very, very familiar with GoToWebinar, but there are two different features that I want to point out. One is there's you'll see it says questions. Use that, please, liberally throughout the webinar to put your questions in that little area. Matt is on. Matt, can you unmute and just say hi to everybody so that they can hear your voice?
Hey, everyone.
Okay, thank you. So Matt will be fielding your questions, and he will send them to me periodically. So just do that throughout. There's also, you'll note, a chat bar as well. The chat is more for things like I'm having technical problems, I'm not hearing Denise, or something to that effect. Keep in mind, unfortunately, with technology, anything can happen. You can have some bandwidth problems on your end that might interfere. But long story short, we intend to record this webinar, so hopefully you'll have access to it afterwards as well.
Denise, real quick, I'd like to just clarify the chat
Sure.
functionality is just for us to communicate things to attendees. But if anyone on this, any attendees have any problems of any kind, you can still also just put those in the question field,
Okay.
and I'll be happy to just address them accordingly. So I just
Okay.
wanted to
Sounds.
clarify in case
No,
anyone's like,
I'm glad
where's
you
the
did.
chat panel?
Okay, great, great. Okay, I didn't know that was disabled. Thank you so much. All right, listen, we're going to start out by a very simple question. And Matt, if you wouldn't mind, it'll be easier for everybody if you just put this hyperlink into the chat itself, so that they can see it. If for some reason that's disabled, just to the participants on the call, please just copy this into your browser, because what it's meant to do is give you the opportunity to answer the question that is on the screen, and you're going to see it come to life. So put this link into your browser, and in one word, could you please tell us what is a sign that your company culture is struggling or suffering to some extent? And let's see that come to life. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes just to make that happen. And then I will activate this, and let's see it come to life. Okay. I like what I'm seeing. Hopefully everyone else can see this too. Turnover is getting bigger and bigger, which makes total sense. I love the one that says whispers. Disengagement is also getting bigger and bigger, indicating more and more people are answering with disengagement. Unhappiness is a big one. All right. So we get an idea that the actual signs of a culture ailing are not necessarily, there's no big sign on the wall that says the company is ailing. There are symptoms associated with it, and you've identified some of them actually very, very nicely. Thank you for that participation. Let me just give you a very, very, very brief introduction as to who we are. I know many of you on the call have had quite a bit of engagement with us, so I won't belabor it. But as you know, we are a full service organizational culture and diversity and inclusion firm. The key to our secret sauce is that we do have significant technology that is meant to scale and sustain these initiatives. For those of you who have been following me for a long, long time, you know that my career path started as an attorney. I was the litigator who won the first class action under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which kind of thrusted me into the diversity and inclusion arena. I was actually looking for a way to get out of the law. Many of you in HR know that the law is not often extremely good to us in terms of being able to effectuate change. There's always a winner and a loser, and not much seems to change. I pivoted to international mergers and acquisitions, and that was a phenomenal experience because I was negotiating all over the world and got to see cross-cultural patterns and the way they were influencing deals and business success. And I used that as a model to formulate a consulting firm that I scaled to 65 countries and ultimately sold to Ernst& Young. Now you can imagine when I sold that business to Ernst & Young, they took me in as a partner leading a division called Culture, Inclusion, and Innovation. And you can just imagine, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I felt like I had, I don't know, been dropped on some sort of spaceship because I went from this tiny, tiny little firm to this 200,000 person firm with all the resources associated with it. I was given the opportunity to scale my culture methodology with technology. I had a phenomenal team behind me that supported us winning the Innovation Award that year. It was incredible. But what I also learned was what happens when a small company enters a big company, when you're trying to assimilate into a new culture, for example, but also keep the essence of who you are as a culture. In particular, remember when Ernst & Young acquired us, they were acquiring us because we were lean, we were innovative, and so becoming part of their culture was important, but maintaining our culture was equally important to the value of why they acquired us to begin with. So in terms of the next stage of the journey, which was obviously leaving Ernst & Young to found Lead Inclusively, we have a couple of very significant differentiators. We're one of the only culture firms out there that is woman-owned. I know that's important to some of you who are particularly focused on diversity and inclusion. We are very focused on making sure that everything that we do is scalable globally, so it's a non-ethnocentric approach. We have a methodology that aligns with our clients' existing methodologies, assets, all the hard work that you have been doing. We need to align with that in order to make any sort of learning or consulting sticky, so we're very conscious of that. All of the learning that we do is focused on embedding the significant behaviors, and in particular inclusive behaviors, into everyday life. So, and then of course our award-winning technology is something that we are unbelievably proud of, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that at a later time. I think the important thing is, and this is true for all of us, that what we do has to be measurable, right? We can't say that we're changing culture and then not have a means by which to assess or evaluate whether we're actually making a difference. So we need to know what our goals are in terms of culture transformation, and then align meaningful milestones and action steps to meet those goals. So for example, on the left, one of our clients, their goal was to increase their competitiveness in China, their sales in China. And it was extremely important to them to understand what the differences were between selling in the American culture and in China, and what the gaps were. So we knew exactly what we were solving for when we went in there, a critical factor. And so that, therefore, when we got the results of 35% more reps meeting quota, or an increase of 32% in the average deal size, et cetera, it was a phenomenal result, but it was a very calculated result as well. On the right, you can see a case study where the culture transformation was, let's get some gender parity here. Let's make it measurable. Let's increase diversity at critical levels, for example, director level and above. Let's not just see gender parity at the baseline, at the entry level, but let's move women through middle management, and let's make that measurable. So you'll note throughout that I'm going to be encouraging you to really know what you're solving for, and to create meaningful metrics associated with that. The last thing I'll tell you super quickly before moving on to the content is that the three areas that we're really focused on is we diagnose, so we want to make sure that you have the correct diagnostics in place. We support you every step of the way in terms of your own organizational tools that you need. And then most importantly, we're creating a journey of culture transformation at scale. So if you were to speak with us in more detail, at some later time, you'd see that the diagnostic tools are powerful. For example, I'll just mention one of them. The Leadership Baseline and Action Plan is a very short survey for leaders. It's confidential, and it after it takes 13 minutes basically. When that leader presses send, he or she gets a findings and recommendations report and action plan regarding their behaviors, in this case, very much focused on inclusion, comes directly into their inbox. So we don't have time to talk about all these tools. The only thing that I will say is that every one of them is extremely actionable. We don't have time, none of us have time for the theoretical. The second is the organizational support stack, and that really is making sure that you have everything from your strategy sessions supported, the executive roadmap you need for buy-in, any sort of help with EBRGs, D&I communication, any sort of process with regard to HR. And lastly, and most importantly, is the learning at scale solution stack, meaning, and again, this is something that we craft, but normally live workshops for very senior leaders, scaling with e-learning, supporting that with virtual webinars so that individuals have the chance to ask questions in a live virtual setting, and then our virtual coach app. So that's my unbelievably quick synopsis of who we are and what we do, so that it gives you a little bit of context for the learning that you're about to experience. And having said that, let's move directly on to that substantive learning. The very first thing I want to share with you is those warning signs, and you have all already mentioned some of them. So this is not going to be a complete surprise, but perhaps it gives you just a slightly different twist or reinforces what you already know. The very first warning sign is attrition, and I think that was mentioned by at least a couple of you. Now, what you're seeing here in front of you is actually somewhat typical in terms of enterprise, where you see a fair amount of gender parity, for example, at the beginning stages, at the entry level of the talent pipeline, and you'll see that gradually you have this narrowing taking place. So attrition is absolutely a sign that your culture is ailing, but when you cut the data demographically and you see that there is an uneven level of attrition, and by that I mean that there is a demographic or more than one demographic that is unevenly being impacted, that augments the problem, right? It's attrition is bad enough as it is, but when attrition is disproportionate, it is a deeper sign that something's going on. In this case, that there is likely a lack of inclusion from a cultural point of view that is driving that attrition. So that's warning sign 101. Warning sign 202, and several of you mentioned this in your initial poll, is decreased engagement. And in particular, when you see that employee engagement is disproportionate when the data is cut by gender or by people of color. The extent of the cost we'll get into in a little while, but having access to this data is extremely important. If you're not measuring it, obviously it's pretty hard to fix something that you're not actually measuring it. So gender and people of color notwithstanding, if you're seeing a decline in engagement, and particularly among certain levels of engagement, we tend to see that right middle management and above, we start to see engagement decline, particularly among certain demographics. You know that it's a red flag. It's a red flag that there is some sort of problem or struggle related to culture. And the third is a disconnect between the internal and the external brand. What do I mean by that? That's why you might notice I picked up on somebody or more than one person saying whispering, because it's not necessarily what's being said, in a meeting or, up front or in, in a town hall environment. It's what's being said in the hallway by the virtual water cooler, so to speak, that is really significant. And when there is a significant disconnect between the internal brand and the external brand, that's when you start to see very significant disillusionment, unhappiness, and decline in Glassdoor scores, problems with recruitment. It's not something you can hide. It's like when you're in a relationship, you might if you chose to lie to the person, you can't lie to yourself. It just kind of permeates your being. It's the same thing with this situation. So if you're in a company where, and I'm using the term pay for play rather loosely to mean advertisements and commercials and some of these awards that are really dependent on uh, on contributions to certain magazines, et cetera. And what's actually happening internally is completely different. That actually creates way more problems than it solves. So let me stop here for a moment. And Matt, if you wouldn't mind, if there are questions that are being fed to you, would you mind giving me one or two? I realize that we're going to be very strict about our timing, but we're totally on time for a couple of questions. And you'll have to unmute to do that.
Yeah, so far all I'm seeing is one, if management is not sharing these details on, things that are metric driven like attrition or engagement, how do many even know if there's a culture problem?
Okay, thank you. That's a fantastic question, actually. Okay, this is one of the problems that we have classically, is that a lot of companies do have these surveys. Some don't, but a lot do have employee engagement surveys, for example, but they don't make that data available. And if they do make it available, they're not communicating very well about what they're doing to address any of the issues that come up. But in answer to your question of, how do you know even if those details are not being shared, you know because people are talking to you about it. You know because of what you're experiencing. Because you're probably monitoring the Glassdoor scores. It's almost instinctual. So the fact that you're not getting actual reports on the level of attrition or the level of engagement is not as telling as what you're experiencing internally. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate
And
that.
actually,
Yeah,
I had one more comment if we have time.
sure.
What is the best approach to measure gaps in internal versus external brand?
Honestly, I think it's Glassdoor scores. I really do. I think that that's the most telling measurement. Very good question. Thank you. Okay, in terms of the cost of an ailing culture, let's get into that specifically. The cost of attrition is just overwhelming. A typical firm, with 3,000 employees, can expect to lose about $24 million annually on attrition. 17% of that is attributable to inclusion. So you can extrapolate just how much that is. It's in the hundreds of millions. And I'll tell you something really interesting. The data is so good now, the studies are so good now that we actually created a something called an ROI calculator, which basically takes all of the prevailing research that we have, including, by the way, by industry, and puts it into a spreadsheet of sorts. Of course, it's a little fancier than that, but more or less puts the calculation into a spreadsheet. So for our clients, we can literally tell them what the cost is of attrition, and also of employee engagement. So the second cost is the cost of disengagement. A disengaged employee costs an organization approximately $3,400 for every $10,000 in annual salary. That doesn't even take into consideration the average cost to recruit, hire, and train a new employee. So the estimate is approximately that it's costing the American economy up to $350 billion a year in lost productivity alone. You can imagine we just can't afford as a society and as an economy to not take this extremely seriously. We have great studies out there. McKinsey is one of them. They have done great studies on basically the poor financials generally, that you're squandering innovation, that's leading to negative profits. The larger companies among us are losing about 2 points of market share to smaller businesses that actually do focus fairly heavily on their organizational culture, and in particular, making sure that that culture is purpose-led. The damage to the external brand, again, more amorphous, but for those of you who have experienced it, the distraction from the business at hand is simply overwhelming. You know, you're talking about a tremendous portion of our talent pipeline, and in particular, millennials and beyond. That will apply for a job where the brand is being actively curated and where the brand is purpose driven. So where everything revolves around that. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. For those of you who have been at the wrong end of negative public relations, you know just how difficult it is. One of the most interesting you know, case studies out there, we're calling the racist soap dispenser, which basically, for those of you who don't know it, there was a soap dispenser technology that was developed that, based on not having diversity in the innovation process, in other words, in the potential customer pool, never realized until after it was already you know, deployed and the product already existed, that the mechanism by which you know, the machine, the dispenser, is alerted that there is a hand underneath, was actually not picking up darker skin color. So people of color literally could not use this dispenser. I mean, talk about an unbelievable example of both the importance of inclusion in your entire product life cycle, but as well negative, unintended, you know, negative PR. You're probably familiar with the Google walkout, where they just, you know, there wasn't a lawsuit initially, but people literally walked out. There was negative press by the New York Times related to sexual harassment, and the employees at Google orchestrated a walkout, not in one location, but on multiple continents. The legal risks, I don't have to get into. You know them as well as I do. You have lawsuits every day that are not necessarily dramatic. So Me Too is very dramatic, for example, but you have lawsuits related to microaggressions as well. So it doesn't have to be this, you know, this huge, you know, blow up to make a real difference in terms of tarnishing the brand. What's the cost associated with that? Absolutely astronomical, and probably, you know, not even measurable. So let me pause now, Matt, if you don't mind. Could you share with me any questions that people have about the whole concept of the ailing culture?
Yeah, only questions I had was, can we share the ROI calculator that you had mentioned? And then I also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And then lastly, there was a question just about if they can get access to the slide deck. And I can send over a PDF version of this deck to anyone who wants to just, just shoot me a request in the question and section, and I'll make a note to have it over to everyone.
Okay. With regard to the ROI calculator, I will look into that. I think the answer is, yeah, I think if you're on this webinar, our CRO, Andrea Dranchak, will make the ROI calculator available, I think. So I would just email me, Matt, if you can put my email into the chat. It's denise.hummel@leadinclusively.com. I will forward that request to Andrea. But I'm 90% sure that she would support that. And it is a phenomenal tool. It'll blow you away. For those of you who are trying to, galvanize the kind of buy-in from senior staff, from senior leaders, and the resources, it really is invaluable. And I think that she would absolutely support that, even if you're not a client. Thank you, Matt. Okay, now, we've set up the problem. Let's move on to the solution, right? That's probably what we've all been waiting for. And there is bad news and good news. So I will start with the bad news, and I will move very quickly on to the good news, because it's not all bad. But the bad news is that 70% of culture transformations fail. The estimate is that there's about 900 billion wasted in these failed transformations. By the way, transformations also include integrations in terms of, transformations, meaning a culture that's transforming from one culture to another, versus integrations, two companies that are coming together to form a common culture. And of the ones that do succeed, it is very clear from the studies that the ones that succeed are where the leaders are actually modeling the behavior, and are basically doing what they need to do to develop their teams. The thing that is a little disturbing is that the ones that are succeeding are the ones in which leaders spend more than half their time on the actual, working on the actual transformation itself. That's very disconcerting. And it was to me when I was doing these massive transformations and integrations. This is the sort of thing that kept me up at night, because how in the world can you expect leaders to do their day job and do this as well? Now let's move on to the good news. The good news is that if you actually understand that culture is the fulcrum around which everything else turns, you can pull this off. So if you've determined that your organizational culture, and by the way, let's define culture to a certain extent. The easiest way to do that is to think about what your company values are, what your leadership KPIs are. Okay, that's what your culture is. So if your culture is something, something like, we innovate to change, human lives, in some aspect of, biotech, and everything else that you're doing revolves around that. And you'll see here that these are the areas where you can actually impact behavior change. Okay, so these five on the top, the KPIs at the bottom, I put in there just to remind you that if you're not measuring this, we are what we measure. Sorry, I know, I hate it too, but we are what we measure. So let me get into this with a little bit more specificity. You'll see I have, hiring, performance management, team development, and so on. But why am I saying that? The reason why I'm saying that is because each of these are opportunities to embed the culture that you're trying to embed. So if it's inclusion, it's inclusion. If it's innovation, it's innovation. Whatever you're trying to embed, you need an actual, opportunity to do that. And these are the five areas. Hiring is obviously the first step of curating organizational culture, because if you're not hiring for your culture, you're hiring for something else, right? If the whole idea of the transformation is inclusion, and your hiring process is not inclusive, and the people that you're hiring is not inclusive, it's really unlikely that you're going to get an inclusive culture. Same thing with innovation, same thing with, whatever, big thinkers, people with high integrity. Whatever you are trying to embed, hiring is clearly the first step in that. And I would go so far as to say that, slowly but surely eliminating those who don't align with the culture that you're trying to perpetuate is equally important. But hiring clearly is right up there. Meetings take place every single day, so it's not only the what that you do at meetings, it's the how. So if the what is trying to walk the talk of inclusion, but you don't have a curated agenda that includes everyone, you're not bringing out the quieter voices at that meeting, you don't have a sort of rules of engagement where people are not interrupted. I'm sure that that women and people of color, for example, are interrupted 8 to 10 times more than men. These are the sorts of things that either you are taking advantage of the opportunity or you're not. Team development, creating the opportunity for succession planning that supports the culture that you're trying to achieve. Performance management, obviously, that you're pushing through the talent pipeline, the people that are going to perpetuate the culture that you're trying to curate. And the strategy and planning, just like that example that I gave you with the racist soap dispenser. If you're not taking all stakeholders in mind during your strategy and planning, it's the culture is just, you're not going to be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So how do you assess culture? What the first thing to remember again is that you need to know what the central business goals are. What are the revenue goals? What are the growth goals? You have to be absolutely in sync with senior leadership and with the mandates of your leaders first and foremost. And then you have to really think about what the culture drivers are that will best achieve those stated goals. Okay, so far this is, I assume this is, making total sense. Then you need to know what the baseline is. In other words, what is the current culture state? Where are you right now? And then where are you wanting to go? You can't obviously, you can't go to a place where you haven't set a goal of what you're trying to achieve, and you have to know where you came from so that you can actually measure the improvement. And then at that point, you're formulating a very targeted implementation plan that is actionable. You know what the goals are, you know what the behaviors are, and you are able to implement a plan that will align with that. Next, you have to actively connect those business goals with the culture drivers, right? So if your business goals are innovation, we're going to increase the rate, the excellence, the quality of innovation, then you better know what the culture drivers are that are associated with that in terms of increasing diverse ideation and end user effectiveness, for example, and so on. You'll see on the left-hand side examples of business goals. On the right-hand side, hopefully you'll notice some of the culture drivers that are associated with that. And then from there, it's like any good business planning. You've done your assessment, you have an actual implementation plan, and you're working that implementation plan in a cross-functional way. There is no way to do this alone. I've led culture transformations with thousands of people on the actual implementation committees in a cross-functional capacity for organizations that are huge, like 200,000 people, for example. It doesn't work if everybody isn't aligned. It doesn't work if change management and comms is not, working with HR, with learning, and with everyone else. So Matt, at this particular juncture, before we get into culture transformation at scale, I'll just stop very briefly to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, I have one. Basically, they're just saying this is all great, but culture transformation at scale seems very daunting. How do we change behavior in a global enterprise in a way that is sustained?
Okay. So that's almost, thank you, whoever gave that question, because you're giving me a fantastic segue into the next section, which is literally called transformation, culture transformation at scale. So just perfect. And the answer is it begins with leadership, right? For those of you who have heard the term change agents, and are actively using change agents in your organization in an effective way, fantastic. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, they're basically insiders whose behavior signals a beacon of change. So they are walking the talk in everyday interactions, all their events, every time they're public facing. They are considering those behaviors in their strategies. They are committed to behavior change, even if that's not, historically, where the culture, that the organization has thrived. They're also, in the best case scenario, they are driven by purpose, not some sort of ulterior motive, like, being promoted or what have you. And they are actively advocating for these behaviors at all levels of the organization. Now, that's all fine and good, right? But how do we create change agents? And that's where we go back to, actually having a, learning leadership development at scale process, where you're thinking through, what is the winning methodology for this? How are we going to roll this out effectively? Not tomorrow, but all the way through any sort of domestic expansion to multiple different locations, global expansion. Are we doing something that is non-ethnocentric if we're working globally? Thinking that through, all the way. And here's where what I said before is critical. We have to be practicing culture on a daily basis. It is not good enough to have an intention. It has to be practiced, like any habit. If you've ever had to lose weight, or been on some sort of a diet, you know that it is all about habits, and habits are difficult to break. Most of the leaders in our organizations are well intentioned. They're not trying to be non-inclusive. They're not trying to be non-innovative. They simply may not know and how to effectuate these behaviors, and they simply need the support. And so, in terms of culture transformation at scale, this is the sort of thing that used to keep me up at night when I was a leader at Ernst & Young leading these initiatives. And it has not been until recently that we were able to change that. What we basically did is we spent a good year researching the neuroscience behind behavior change, and another year trying to translate that knowledge into technology in a very, very meaningful way. And we basically developed an app that is a virtual coach. It's in everybody's pocket, in terms of our clients, to help them and assist them in these 5 areas that we just mentioned. And it does it, as I said before, in a way that is designed to lead to behavior change. So they actually choose their focus, one of the 5 focuses, and they actually input an actual event associated with one of those 5 focuses that they can practice. So in the case of a meeting, the app will ask them, when is your next meeting, and select a date and time for that meeting. And at that point, right before the meeting, they'll get a nudge message on whatever behavior is trying to be changed. In this case, as we're subject matter experts on inclusion, our initial use case was with inclusion. So they get a nudge on how to conduct an inclusive meeting, how to check their bias at the door if they've clicked on performance management right before the actual performance appraisal, how to conduct an inclusive interview if they've clicked on hiring, and so on and so on. So we have actually developed with technology culture transformation at scale, and it is being used throughout enterprise at this particular point with an incredible amount of success. And in its more expanded form, companies are using it not only for inclusion, but for anything they're trying to transform. So this is one of our clients that has taken their 4 values and they are using the app in its editable form. There's an admin backend, et cetera, where they can curate exactly what they're trying to do. So the excitement is for us is over the top, just over the top. Now, I will say, oh, you know what? Let me stop for a second, Matt. Is there a question before I go further?
Yeah, I mean, as you may imagine, just a few inquiries about if and how to demo the app that you just kind of laid out for everyone.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you, since let's see the time, we have a few minutes. I'll tell you what I'll do. Um, there's no way that we can do a demo in its entirety, but I will at least give you a couple of seconds just to, just to satisfy who's ever requesting that, and then we can, just let's take this offline to do the full demo. But basically, you'll see at the bottom part of your screen, hopefully you saw that, you click on the Lead Inclusively app, and at that point, these 5 items open, as I mentioned before. If you were a leader, for example, that was hiring, you probably click on hiring, and then it just depends on whether or not, what stage you're at with the hiring. So if you're trying to attract diverse talent, for example, you might want to click on this and get information on how to develop an inclusive job description. If you're about to interview a candidate, you would click on that, and so on. Remember, that's the first part of the neuroscience, is actively choosing what you want to learn about as opposed to being told what to do or learn about. So it's very powerful from the beginning. But normally speaking, just so you know, when we do demo, we will do meetings because everybody can relate to them. It's just so easy to relate to and to see the benefits of it. So if you were to click on meetings, for example, you would get, again, 4 different topic areas: team meetings, interpersonal dynamics, and so on, virtual meetings. And let's say you were about to have a team meeting, you would click on team meetings, and then the app would say, great, when is your next team meeting? You would select a date and time for that. And at that point, the app would say, congratulations, and would give you a little nudge message that would also give you the context of why this is such an important opportunity to embed the particular behavior, right? So in this particular case, it's saying your event has been scheduled. This is a critical time to to practice your behaviors, and you would hopefully click on it, and then you would get a description of why it's such an incredible opportunity. And then at that point, you'd set it and forget it. You wouldn't hear anything from the app unless you actively went into the self-coaching areas until right before the meeting itself. And at that point, you'd get another nudge message that said, here are the tips that you were waiting for. Click on that. And then you get your 3 quick tips. If you're like me and you just want quick information, you'd probably stop there. If you're like some of our other team members, you want more detail, you'd scroll down and get more detail. And then there's even a 3rd level. So it's meeting the learner where that learner is. You'd click on learn more, for example, and then you'd get some, deeper information. You'd get either an article, or you'd get a podcast, or you'd get a video of some kind. The thing I like about this, now, of course, the app in this case comes with our videos, our articles, etc. But the nice thing is that you can edit so you say, thanks, Denise, but who cares about your videos? We want our CEO. We want our chief diversity officer. We want our head of innovation. We want to include an article. We've worked so hard on these assets. No problem. You would simply swap them out in the admin table. So you can see the power behind this. But anyway, I don't want to take, I don't want to do the full demo on a webinar. I just wanted to give you an idea of how to create culture transformation at scale. So let's let's go back to the content itself. And since we're getting questions along these lines, I think I will also add, before asking if there are any final questions, there are a number of ways that we can support you here, from very, very minor all the way, all the way through other support. So the most important thing that you're going to be experiencing is you are going to need to get buy-in for resources, economic resources, bodies, in order to be effective. So know the research. Matt will provide you with the our business case deck. If you're on this call, whether you are a client or not, we will give you our business case deck, which has very significant stats. We do have that ROI calculator, which is normally for our clients only, but I will actively engage Andrea to make that available as well, especially given the question that we got today. We can send you a full, menu of services for those of you who are really want to know all of the, the diagnostics and the organizational support and the learning solution stack. We can send you that. It's a PDF that has all of the services in it. Absolutely nothing would make me happier than to demo the Inclusion Virtual Coach app, and we have almost anyone in our staff can do that for you. In terms of staying informed, we've put a lot of effort into the blogs, the newsletters, these events as well. But the one thing that has really taken off incredibly is the podcasts. And it's partially because of the kinds of people we've been able to attract. I'm lucky enough to be one of Marshall Goldsmith's MG 100. So we've had Marshall Goldsmith on. We've had Chester Elton on. We've had Joel Peterson, who's the chairman of JetBlue. We've had some incredible, Alex Plumley, who heads up HR for UTC Aerospace, and you hear things that are unexpected. And so I'll just say, Michael Bungay Stainer, for example, who is not, when you look at him, statuesque, tall, white male, who has been suffering with cleft palate his entire life, and talked about the unexpected elements of inclusion. Alex Plumley, again, nobody that you would associate at first blush with having any sorts of exclusion issues, talks about being goth. If when he was young, if you saw him in his blue suit, you would say, is this really happening? So there is I think what we need to do is always be conscious of making a human to human connection. These experiences are really, really critical, and sharing them is even more critical. So we have a few moments left. So I would love it if you would chat into the chat bar any sort of thought leadership that you want to share with us, or it could be your experiences as an individual, your experiences in your organization, good or bad, your frustrations. I really think, given the number of thought leaders on this call and the number of people who are devoting their lives to culture transformation and to inclusion in particular, that we should benefit from them. So Matt, I'll hesitate here just a little bit to give people a chance, and if you could curate that would be great. And I think I can see them as well, so if I'll take notes of anything that I see come in as well. Okay. Okay, Matt, I only see two. What are you seeing on your end? Because I'm only getting two that are coming directly to me.
Yeah, I'm seeing a request for a link to the podcast you mentioned, so I'm actually just
Oh,
pasting that in the chat section for everyone
oh,
right now.
brilliant. Brilliant.
Um, so
Oh, that's
hopefully
great.
this goes
Thank you.
through.
Okay. And I have two. Should I read my two?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. So the only two that I'm seeing coming directly to me are one person is saying, I'm an individual contributor, how can I help my organization go in the right direction? And I feel you. When you're not managing people or when you're not high up in your organization, sometimes you feel helpless. But here's the reality. A lot of our clients, for example, actually come from what I would call the grassroots of the organization. People who go forward and try to be a positive force and just alert, more senior people about our services. And I'm going to say at least 20% come to us that way. So please don't be disheartened. Just you have a voice. You are the heart of your organization. So sharing that in a non-judgmental way, in a non-critical way, but sharing that with others certainly is one way to do that. One other person asked to spend a few minutes, and I think we have time, talking with more specificity about our tools. So I'll go back and just very, very quickly, help you to understand the tools that are available to you. And again, I can expose you to these tools through Andrea Jaranchak, if any of them are important to you. So the leadership baseline and action plan I already spoke about, so I won't get into that. The organizational inclusion baseline tool is important because it gives a holistic view of what's going on in your organization and where the opportunity to advance exists. You probably noticed that I spend a lot of time talking about inclusion and innovation as two of the key behaviors, key cultural behaviors, and almost everything that we do, I will tell you, is at that intersection. Because we have found that when we're a diversity and inclusion firm by heart, right? But we have found when we focus just on that, we get nice leaders, but we don't necessarily get nice leaders who perform. So our secret sauce is that we are really focused on the intersection between inclusion and innovation, and our tools are very much reflect that. The leadership development plan tool is a tool that is designed to see how you're doing in those 5 areas that I mentioned. So literally, it takes a very short time to complete, but it asks you 1 or 2 questions on each of those 5 areas, and then results in an immediate report and action plan that is pushed to your inbox. So I can make that available to you if that's something that you're interested in. The metrics and qualitative review workshop. Let's face it, not everyone is in a position to track. They're not at the stage of their development necessarily where they can track, or that they want to track actual metrics associated with diversity and with inclusion. Remember, you can measure at every stage of the talent pipeline, not just your diversity numbers. It's important to spell that out. But there are qualitative ways to measure too, not just quantitative. There are focus groups. There are other ways to get a real handle on what's happening in your organization that don't necessarily include hard numbers if you're not ready for that. And then the custom advanced analytics is just that because we are now not just a culture and diversity inclusion firm, but actually a technology firm, we have the ability to help you with your dashboards, your custom analytics, basically. I didn't even get into the analytics associated with the app, which is unbelievably robust. And I'm happy to talk about that in more detail if you reach out individually. And then the organizational support stack. I touched upon before. The idea is to be able to empower the talent in the room. If you're on this webinar, I can almost guarantee that you are talented in the sense that you care about culture, you know about culture. You might not have the exact tools to put it into work, but you have talent in this area. And the organizational support stack is just about that. It's about empowering you guys to to do what you need to do in terms of communications, change management, really hyper driving your EBRGs so that they're not just a place to get food and drink, but a place to actually learn and move the culture forward. HR process labs to really learn how to engineer the bias out of your HR processes. And then last but not least, the train the trainer. If you have the capacity, you do not have to be wed to a company like ours to scale out your training on a live basis. You can literally be involved in our train the trainer program, and again, we're empowering you and the resources internally so that you're not reliant on external sources. By the way, I should say, anyone that engages with us, and I'll move to the learning stack because that's anyone that engages with us gets the app for a period of I believe it's, I have to ask Andrea, I think it's 60 days. And so if you are doing a live workshop of 25 people, those people will be learning about the 5 different areas to embed inclusion, and they will leave with the app in their pockets so that the learning becomes sticky and sustainable over time. Same thing with the e-learning. And it doesn't matter how many people are on the e-learning. We have companies that are doing this in the thousands. Those people get the app for a period of 60 days. And remember, that's obviously expanded. It can be rolled out further from there, but I'm just talking about in terms of the actual trial associated with it. There is no charge to actually leave there with the app. We want you to have it. We want you to see how these behaviors can be scaled. Same thing with the virtual webinars and so on. So definitely reach out to us on that. And I think we're pretty much out of time. Matt, are there any last minute questions? And if we don't have time, please reach out individually. Maybe make sure that either my name or your name. Actually, Matt at leadinclusively.com is also a great choice, because when I'm traveling, I'm a little hard to reach, but either way, it'll get to the right person. So there's Matt, M-A-T-T at leadinclusively.com, or Denise.Hummel at leadinclusively.com if you want to reach me directly. But the important thing to us is that we are here to help, to be supportive in any way we can. So please don't hesitate in the least to reach out. I'll put up, let's see, I just want to make sure that I've told you everything. I think I have. So that's some of our contact information there on the screen too, in case you want to write that down. And I just want to thank you for joining us. Very, very, very much enjoyed the time together. Take care now.